Have you ever wondered what it would be like if Hugh Grant trapped you inside his house and lectured you about religion? No? Let's the experience of watching Heretic, and it's great. It's written and directed by Brian Woods and Scott Beck, who also wrote the first Quiet Place movie together, and wrote and directed the smash hit 65. It's produced by A24, and it stars Hugh Grant, as I previously mentioned, Sophie Thatcher, who I was already a big fan of from her performance in Yellowjackets, and Chloe East, who I was not familiar with prior to this movie, but am now a big fan of. If you don't know, Heretic is about two Mormon missionaries who visit the house of a strange man named Mr. Reed, who grows increasingly hostile and traps them in his house to test and examine their faith. This is a film with a small cast of characters that mostly consists of the characters having conversations together in rooms where nothing else is really happening but the conversation. So this movie lives or dies based on the performances. If just one of the leads gave a bad performance or even an okay one, it would make the whole movie fall apart. Luckily, everyone knocks it out of the park. Hugh Grant is great as the villain as Mr. Reed. He does a great job of being a blend of charming and creepy, alternating between the two and sometimes being both at the same time. And a lot of movies like this where it's a killer who preys on people with their charisma and has to socially lure people in, I usually just think that the person is just creepy. And I'm like, why would any rational person listen to this extremely creepy man and spend any amount of time with him and not immediately leave? This film does not have this issue. Hugh Grant is very charismatic. He lulls the characters into a false sense of security whilst also pushing their buttons and sort of bringing things up to test them and mess with them a little bit. He does it in such a way where he can play it off as being unintentionally offensive, or that he's just asking questions because he's curious about the Mormon religion, until obviously he crosses a line he cannot come back from and cannot play innocent anymore. I also like the differences in both the way the characters are written and the performances of Sophie Thatcher's and Chloe East's character. Sophie Thatcher plays someone who is not raised in a church her whole life, but rather someone whose mom converted while she was around a teenager, it seems like in the movie. It's not exactly stated. So she has a little bit of a different perspective than Chloe East's characters. She is still very devout, but she is more level-headed and is less naive and seems a little bit more experienced with the world than Chloe East's character. And when Hugh Grant starts being creepy and crossing lines and putting them in uncomfortable situations, she's the one who wants to verbally fight back and challenge him, while Chloe East is much more passive and appeasing. She's also much more bubbly and friendly, but also has a hint of like nervousness underneath it, like she's gonna mess something up socially. And her strategy once Hugh Grant starts being creepy is try to go along with what he's saying and appease him and agree with him. I think having the two leads both be very devout, but also very different in personality and the way they deal with harsh situations was a great writing decision. And this movie has a lot of good writing until it isn't anymore, which I'll get to later. The dialogue's very good. The back and forth between the two leads and Hugh Grant is very interesting. It's very interesting to hear their different perspectives on religion. Now, I was worried this movie would be Mormon propaganda because the Mormon church is very bad and is a strange religious cult with a lot of weird beliefs. But it's more about faith in general, and it's obvious that Mormonism was picked as the missionaries' religion for a deliberate thing. And Sophie Thatcher was actually raised Mormon, but is no longer practicing, so I'm sure that this was a very personal story for her. Another element that adds a lot to the film and stops it from getting stale is the cinematography. This movie is shot beautifully. The camera is always moving in deliberate ways. There are a lot of extreme close-ups to make you feel uncomfortable like the characters do. A lot of the close-ups also, the character's face isn't fully in frame. It's like weirdly off center, which also makes you uncomfortable because it's like, is something behind them gonna show up? Like something just out of focus? It's shot brilliantly. When the characters are more at ease or they believe that they're having some sort of victory over Hugh Grant, the camera is more far away and it makes the sets, the rooms they're in, feel bigger. Whereas when they get more and more uncomfortable and Hugh Grant is gaining ground, the camera moves in on them them, almost like the walls are closing in around them. There are multiple points in the film where the characters will react to something before the camera shows what it is, and it slowly either switches angles or dollies over to push in. It's great. It's great at building tension. It's also just visually great. There are 2 camera sequences in the movie which I did not like. They are very surreal in a movie that doesn't have any surrealism prior to it. One of them actually confused me for a second and made me think that something else happened and was actually supposed to happen. While the surreal shots were good and they're good technically, I do not think that they fit in this movie and distracted from the scenes they were supposed to be in. It felt like it was unintentionally surreal rather than something deliberate because there's no other surrealism in the movie. The movie also has some issues in the third act, unfortunately. Whilst earlier in the film, Hugh Grant has a precise point he is arguing from against the missionaries, at a certain point in the movie, he just starts trolling them and just saying whatever he thinks will get a reaction out of them to fuck with them, which I dislike. It also ties into the reveal of his character motivation, which I also thought was very weak and I dislike. It seems like they didn't know how to end the movie, and while they do try to have some thematic through lines and callbacks to stuff that happens in the movie, I thought the ending and a lot of the last act was just weak. It kind of just goes off the rails and loses the thread in a bad way. This is a movie I see general audiences not liking. One, because it's marketed and billed as a horror film, when really it's a thriller. The trailers portray the film in a very misleading way, making it out to be some sort of religious Saw-esque movie, like there's going to be traps and stuff, where there is not. It's not really a horror movie at all. There's some creepy imagery and a few creepy scenes, especially the framing of one shot that is fucking terrifying, but it's more a tense thriller and an intellectual battle between characters rather than a movie like Saw, which is what it was marketed as. I can definitely foresee people taking to social media to call it the least scary and most boringest film ever made, complaining about how it's just people talking and it's not interesting at all. Anyway, that's Heretic, a great movie with terrific cinematography, acting, and dialogue that has a weak third act that holds the film back from being a masterpiece but is not enough to ruin the whole thing. What's your favorite A24 film? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe for more content. And if you like this video, check out some of my other movie reviews. Playlist is right here. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.